In the night silence, when everyone had already fallen asleep and only a lone streetlight flickered outside, sounds could be heard. A faint, barely distinguishable whisper awakened the soul of the ancient house, causing its stone walls to listen intently. The story begins with the arrival of the Blackwood family in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where residents harbored their secrets deeper than the darkness of the night. The Blackwood family, consisting of Father Robert, Mother Alice, and their young daughter Emma, seemed ordinary at first glance. However, their move to the house next door to the somber Finches and mysterious Holloways did not leave them indifferent to the surrounding atmosphere. It immediately became clear to them that something strange was happening in this secluded neighborhood. The first warning signs were the rumors circulating through the street like ominous shadows in the darkness. Residents spoke of strange sounds emanating from the Finches' house after midnight, strange flashes of light, and unfamiliar figures gliding past windows like ghosts disappearing into the darkness. But the strangest events began after Robert accidentally stumbled upon a hidden compartment in the basement of their house. The old, sealed doors caught his attention, and he couldn't resist the urge to unravel their mystery. However, when he finally managed to open them, he found only emptiness, as if someone had already taken everything valuable. At that moment, Robert realized that something was wrong with their new home. He told his family about it, but no one wanted to take his words seriously. Alice comforted herself with the thought that these were just tales of neighbors, and Emma continued to play her games, ignoring her father's warnings. But the strange events continued. They noticed that someone was watching them. Their phones sometimes rang lifelessly, and on the other end of the line, only heavy breathing could be heard. And in the evenings, when they gathered for dinner, ghostly shadows flickered in the windows, as if someone was watching them from the darkness. One night, late when everyone was asleep, Emma heard a faint tapping on her window. She got up to see who could be outside, but saw nothing. The whispering wind murmured something in her ear, and she felt shivers running down her spine. But before she could do anything, the tapping resumed, louder and more insistent this time. Shaking with fear, Emma approached the window and opened it. There was no one outside, only emptiness and darkness. But suddenly she noticed movement in the shadows, and something swiftly passed by the window. It was a figure cloaked in black, like a ghost disappearing into the night. Emma screamed and closed the window, then ran to her parents to tell them what had happened. But when they returned to her room, all they saw was the closed window and the quiet night silence. The night after, when Robert and Alice were asleep, Emma decided to conduct her own investigation. She left the house and headed to the Finches' house, where she suspected the answer to all the mysteries lay. Under the cover of darkness, she sneaked into their yard and began to explore the surroundings. But her investigation was interrupted by a sudden rustle in the bushes. She stopped, holding her breath, and slowly looked around. And then she saw them ghostly figures moving in the darkness, like hunters pursuing their prey. Emma screamed and tried to run, but it was already too late. They surrounded her, and she realized that she had fallen into a trap. She closed her eyes, expecting the end, but it did not come. When she opened her eyes, she found herself in a dark room, bound and immobile. Before her stood two figures in black cloaks, Mr. and Mrs. Finch. Their faces were hidden in the darkness, but Emma felt like they were smiling. "Welcome to our world, dear Emma," whispered Mrs. Finch, and her voice pierced Emma as if she heard it inside her head. "What? What are you going to do to me?" Emma asked, her voice trembling with fear. "We just want you to feel at home, Mr. Finch replied, his words echoing ominously in the emptiness. Thus began the nightmare that became her reality. The Blackwood family disappeared as if they had never existed, and only frightening shadows and grim figures remained to remind them that they were once here. And the streets of the suburban neighborhood were shrouded in silence, interspersed only with the whisper of the wind, as if it were a sinister harbinger of impending horror. Over time, the house where the Blackwood family lived was purchased by new occupants, a young family named Johnson. Young parents, Michael and Sarah, eagerly accepted the offer to buy this house, thinking it would be the perfect place for their little daughter, Elizabeth. From the very beginning, they felt that something was wrong with this house. It all started when on the first night after moving in, they heard faint whispers coming from the walls. They tried to explain it to themselves as echoes of sounds from the street or some technical issue, but the more time they spent in this house, the clearer it became that something else was with them here. Gradually, the horrifying phenomena began to escalate. Objects began to move on their own, doors opened and closed by themselves, and sometimes they heard strange sounds, as if someone was murmuring something in their ear. They began to feel that some invisible force was watching them, playing with their minds and emotions. At first, Michael and Sarah tried to ignore these strange events, telling themselves that it was just stress from the move or their imagination. They even called in specialists to check for defects in the house, but nothing was found. However, with each passing day, their anxiety only grew. Especially terrifying was the night. When they went to bed, they felt that something was present in the room, something sinister and incomprehensible. Sometimes they woke up feeling that someone was touching them, but when they opened their eyes, there was no one around. One evening, during dinner, something strange happened. They were sitting at the table, discussing their day, when suddenly the lights went out. The room was plunged into complete darkness, and they heard whispers, as if hundreds of voices were whispering something in their ears. Sarah screamed and tried to turn on the lights, but nothing happened. They were able to turn on the lights only after a few minutes, but the dark presence remained in the room, as if it was watching them from the shadows. Michael and Sarah realized that they needed to take action. They turned to the local residents, trying to find out what was happening in this house. Some of them told terrifying stories about previous owners and how this place was cursed with a sinister past. But some residents suggested they turn to psychics and mystics who, they claimed, could help unravel the mystery of this house. Sarah was skeptical about such things at first, but Michael decided to give it a try because they didn't know where else to turn. They found a newspaper ad for a local mystic named Madame Zelenska. Sarah was initially quite skeptical, but Michael convinced her to at least give it a try. They agreed to meet the following Saturday. Madame Zelenska turned out to be a strange old woman with eyes full of mysterious light and a voice that sounded as if it came from the depths of time. She performed a ritual in their home, revealing the presence of sinister forces that had long dwelled in this place. According to her, the house was cursed with the souls of those who had once lived here and perished in terrifying circumstances. She offered to help them banish these sinister forces, but warned that it would not be easy. Michael and Sarah agreed to her help because they realized that otherwise they would not be able to live in this house. Madame Zelenska conducted a cleansing ritual, invoking ancient powers and incantations. They sat in a closed circle, holding hands, and closed their eyes to avoid seeing the horror that might occur. At that moment, they felt something beginning to move around them, as if the air was filled with the energy of invisible forces. The room grew dark, and they heard whispers piercing their minds, as if the wind from the past was bringing them its secrets. When the ritual was completed, they felt the weight of darkness lift from their shoulders, and they could breathe freely. Madame Zelenska assured them that the sinister forces had been banished, and now they would be able to live in this house peacefully. Sarah and Michael thanked her for her help and felt relieved, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from them. They hoped that now they could start a new life in this house, but something told them that this was not the end of their nightmare. Since then, there have been no more paranormal phenomena in the Johnsons' house. They tried to forget the past and start a new life. But something inside them told them that their nightmare was not over yet, and that the sinister forces could return to finish what they had started. Several months after the cleansing ritual, the Johnson family's life finally seemed to be settling down. They enjoyed the peace and tranquility that they had long been unable to find in their new home. However, although they tried to forget the past and enjoy their new life, something inside them suggested that this was not the end of their nightmare. Over the next few months after the ritual, nothing terrible happened. They again enjoyed ordinary life, meeting with friends, having picnics, and fun outings with their daughter. They tried not to think about the past, hoping that it was just a sinister episode of their lives that was now behind them. However, as is often the case, peace turned out to be just an illusion. One day, when Michael returned home from work, he found that all the doors and windows were open, and his daughter and wife were missing. Panic seized him, and he began to search every corner of the house, shouting and praying that they were safe. Hours turned into eternity as he wandered through his home, but they found no trace. Fear and despair forced him to turn to the police for help, but even they could not find any evidence or clues as to what had happened to his family. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, but Michael never found his family. He became an outcast from his home, lonely and devastated. From time to time, he heard whispers that seemed familiar to him, as if voices from the past were returning to haunt him. As for the Blackwood family, their story remained a mystery to the local residents. Their disappearance was never solved, and their house remained empty and abandoned, as if it had been engulfed by the sinister shadow of the past. In the end, the story of the house on Dead Heart Street remained a secret to everyone except those who lived within its walls. For those who survived the nightmare that occurred here, it will always serve as a reminder that sinister secrets can hide behind the most ordinary facades, and that no one is immune to the dark forces that may prove stronger than they seem at first glance.